Hello, folks. Good evening, and welcome to this very special session of Tadaima Book Club with George Takei. We're going to hear first a reading from George's forthcoming book, They Called Us Enemy, and then we'll have a live Q&A. So please leave some questions for George in the comments, and we'll look forward to talking about them. And thank you so much, George, for sharing your time with us and sharing your work. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Hello, I'm George Takei, but some people call me Uncle George. Many years ago, when I was only 5 years old, my family and I were taken from our home by the United States government and put on a train that took us to a prison camp far away, along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans, although we had done nothing wrong. Just because we were Japanese Americans and we looked like the soldiers from Japan who had attacked the United States. Looking back on it as an adult, I can see what a great injustice this was. But at the time, I was just a little kid. For me, my brother, and my baby sister, all we knew was that we were leaving our normal lives behind. My father told us we were going on a long vacation. But for me, it was an adventure. Last year, I teamed up with some friends of mine to make a graphic memoir about this childhood experience. And now, I'd like to read a little bit of it for you. October 7th, 1942. We see a train come roaring down the tracks. A sign is visible that says, "Welcome to Arkansas, land of opportunity." Roar! 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 Roar Relocation Center, also known as Camp Roar, was the easternmost of the 10 internment sites. On this map, we can see the 10 camps: Tule Lake, Minidoka, Heart Mountain, Topaz, Manzanar, Amachi, Poston, Gila River, Jerome, and Roar. We can see that Roar is at the eastern edge of Arkansas, in the swamps where the Arkansas River joins the Mississippi. Look, it's Imai-san from North Hollywood. Soon we were lined up under the hot and heavy Arkansas sun. Takei, family of 5, Takekuma, Takei and family, right here. The guard came over to us. Block 6, Barrack 2, Unit F. That's where the driver's gonna take you. Listen to Mama. That's where we are going. Are we gonna ride in that truck? Yes, we rode past the barbed wire fence and into the camp. Camp Roar had 33 blocks. Each block was designed to house 250 people. At its peak, Roar was home to nearly 8,500 Japanese Americans. You can see that I wasn't too sure about this place. Daddy? This is Block 6. Your housing is located in one of the following. I'm going to find our barrack. You boys do as Mama says. Kaka! You know what that sound is? No, what is it? It's a dinosaur out there. A dino what? A dinosaur, dummy. Don't you know about dinosaurs? They're great big monsters that lived millions of years ago. And then they died. They died? Then how come we hear them out there? Well, the only place they didn't die is right here in Arkansas. That's why they put this fence up.
to keep them caged in. Okay, I found 62F. That looks heavy, Mrs. Takei. She never let anyone carry that bag for her. Not Daddy, and not this young man lending a helping hand. It's so hot! Finally, we reached our barrack. Here we are. I'll never forget the heat that poured out of that cabin when Daddy opened the door. It steamed like a furnace. Thanks for your help, friends. It's too hot inside. Wait here while I open the windows. Clack. Let fresh air get in there for a while, and then we'll go in. Even after waiting, when we finally went inside, the air was still heavy and boiling. Don't touch it. It might still be hot. What we sleep on? They're distributing army cots at the other end of the block. I'll get some people to help me carry them here. Suddenly, we heard voices through the wall. Wow, it's hot in here. Thanks for your help. Anytime, don't mention it. We hear right through wall. We not have privacy. Shikata ga nai. And a footnote explains that shikata ga nai means it can't be helped. I guess that's the way it's going to be. So they began unloading the bags into our new home. What do you think that is? She saved the biggest treat for last. Then Mama proudly revealed the secret that had been hidden inside her heavy bag. Her sewing machine. You brought that? I not want to leave it behind. And children going to be needing new clothes. Daddy stared at her for a long time. You knew this was forbidden. I know, but children be needing new clothes. At first, Daddy was baffled. But then he smiled. And you knew this was forbidden. I didn't really understand what was so funny, but I do remember that to us kids, that sewing machine was one big, heavy, crushing disappointment. Setting up our new life in Roar immediately became priority number one. We see Mama working with her sewing machine. Mama began the impossible work of making a home for us out of a rough-hewn single room. She ran up curtains made from government surplus fabrics. Using strips of discarded rags, she braided together colorful floor mats. We see Mama washing our clothes and playing with the three of us kids. About the only thing Mama didn't have to do was cook. But to her, it was no relief. The kitchen was just one more aspect of caring for her family that she was denied. One more loss. I realize now that besides comforting us, perhaps everything she did was also her own statement of defiance.
Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you'll read the rest of the story for yourself and talk about it with your family and friends. It's so important that we understand what happened in the past so that we can stand up to injustice today and work together for a future where everyone is treated fairly with liberty and justice for all.
Hi, George.
Hello.
Thank you so much for reading some of your book with us and then also joining to have this conversation. We feel really lucky to be able to talk with you. I wanted to start by asking, and I know we see a little bit of it in the section that you read, but what do you remember most about your time at Rower? I know you were a kid, so what did you do for fun? How did you spend your days?
Well, actually, I have fond memories of Rower because I'm a Southern Californian kid, and I'd never been to the swamps before. And beyond the barbed wire fence, and some was the swamps, the bayou that the people of Arkansas called it, and some of it came under the barbed wire fence to us. And so it was a wonderland catching butterflies and little black fish that swam around the edge of the bayou and caught them and put them in a jar. And I woke up in the morning and watched them, looked at them every morning, and miraculous things happened. These little black fish one morning had little bumps on the side, and the next morning the bumps got larger, and then the third morning it looked like legs, and before I knew it, the tail fell off, and they escaped from my jar. The fish had turned into frogs. Magical.
Oh, that's great. Oh, and do you remember, did you sit with your family in the mess hall? Did you eat most of your meals with your parents? And what kinds of food do you remember eating when you were there?
Well, that was the big event for us, the 3 meals. And we did eat as a family, although my father was a block manager. So he tried to eat with us as often as he could, but he was always being taken away by some emergency or some meeting down at the administrator's headquarters and got delayed. But we tried to eat as a family. My mother insisted that we eat with her. Some of the older kids tended to eat eat with the other kids, but we always ate with our family. And as a teenager, I had many discussions with my father after dinner, and he told me in one of those conversations that one of the early meals was made up of beef brain. No one had heard of beef brain before. It was this. My father said I had it, but I don't remember it. It was this pile of kind of brownish, reddish glop, and he said that that evening the latrine got a lot of business.
Oh, maybe it's better you don't remember that particular meal. Wow.
But I remember my father telling me about it. Yeah. And that has not left my memory.
Oh my goodness. And I love the story you tell about your mother's sewing machine, and that you're so excited it's some kind of surprise, and then it's the sewing machine, which I'm sure now as an adult it's thinking about, oh, that made so much sense that she would bring that with her, but that crushing disappointment as a kid that it wasn't something else. What did your mom use the sewing machine for? What did she make while you were at Rower?
Well, let me tell you a little bit more backstory behind that big duffel bag that my mother hefted onto the train going to Roar. She knew it was going to be a long trip, and she wanted the children to not be bored, which of course children always become that. So she had bought and prepared for us with that bag being crammed with Cracker Jack boxes, animal crackers, candies, chewing gum, goodies, and
books, storybooks for our father to read to us.
Mm.
So it was a magical bag.
Wow.
And on that train trip, she kept pulling out wonderful or delicious goodies. And so we knew,
Wow.
because it was a heavy bag, that it must be loaded with a lot of good treats. And so we were really looking forward to getting to Roar and her opening up that duffel bag and sharing with us all that heavy bounty.
Mm.
We never expected her sewing machine. So it was a practical thing. And she didn't, we had to leave everything behind when we had to leave our home.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a brand new portable sewing machine, and she didn't want to abandon it. And she felt that she was strong enough to carry that.
Wow.
My mother was a strong lady,
Right.
a strong-willed lady as well.
Mm.
Yeah, she marched past all those big, lumbering, heavily armed MPs carrying contraband. They were forbidden. Anything with sharp edges or points was forbidden.
Wow.
And so if any one of those guards had challenged her and exposed her as trying to smuggle contraband in, it would have probably been a different story for us.
Yeah.
But she succeeded and got it in and then revealed it to us. She made all sorts of things with that. She did make clothes for us, particularly for our baby sister, because she was growing out of a lot of her clothes. But she also gathered a lot of rags from people, and she braided them. She tore them into strips and braided them into mats because the floor was pretty rough.
Right.
And to protect, back in the barrack, we'd take our shoes off, and it was kind of splintery. So she made rugs to protect us underfoot.
Mm. Wow. Those are just beautiful memories of your mom. We do have a question from the audience already that I want to ask because we're talking about your parents in camp. So Christy Abo asks, could you explain what a block manager was? My grandfather was also a block manager, and I was never sure what that meant.
Well, the block manager was to manage the block, but that also involved liaising with the camp command. And I remember my father always making speeches in the mess hall after meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then when there were important discussions to be had, usually after dinner, the tables and benches were rearranged, and my father presided over those meetings. There was a unit in one of the barracks set aside as the block manager's office. And if there were problems, and there were always when you have, 250 people all living together under very rough and uncomfortable circumstances. For example, the latrine, especially for the women, was just a row of toilet pots. That was it. The shower was, a pipe with a shower system. And women were very, very uncomfortable with that, and so he needed to organize construction teams to build partitions or other sorts of bits of civilization in this very primitive sort of area. And in my after dinner conversations when I was a teenager after the war, he told me that an important part of his job was being a marriage counselor, because the stress, the anguish, the anxiety, and the terror or the outrage put stress on marriages. And he had to try to calm them down. He did not succeed all the time. There were marriages that broke up in camp. So he was, the block manager's job was to keep things managed in that block, and also be the link with the camp command.
And I think that was an elected position, right? Or a chosen by the community position. So your father must have been a fairly, well-respected person before, or at least, when folks got there, for him to be chosen as, such an important figure in helping so many different aspects of life in camp.
I noticed, this is another memory I have. On that train ride to Arkansas,
mm-hmm.
my father was very silent. He spoke very little. My mother was always busy, taking care of us.
Mm-hmm.
And he was unlike the daddy that he was before camp. He was melancholy and just looking very anguished.
Mm-hmm.
But once we got to Arkansas and things had to be done, he became very active. And my mother was born here in Florin, which is today Sacramento. And but my father was born in Japan, but he was brought over when his mother passed when he was a young boy.
Mm-hmm.
And my paternal grandfather decided to start life anew, go to this new country, America, with his two boys. My father was the younger of the two boys, and they came to San Francisco. And so my father was educated, raised, went to middle school, high school, and college in San Francisco. And so he was American in every respect, except for his birth.
Mm-hmm.
And so he spoke English fluently, and he spoke Japanese fluently.
Mm.
And so he was able to communicate with the Issei, the immigrant generation, as well as the American-born English-speaking Nisei generation.
Right.
And so he became something of a, middle guy. He was in his late 30s by then, so he age-wise too, he was able to bridge the generational gap. And so that's how he became, that he was elected block manager.
Wow. And George, you've talked a little bit about these conversations, after dinner conversations you've had with your dad when you were older. But what do you remember about life after Rower? When you left, where did you go? And what was it like sort of adjusting to being outside of camp?
The worst part of internment for us, the kids, was after we were released, because children are amazingly adaptable.
Right.
Yes, we were behind barbed wires, and we traveled a long distance from Los Angeles, California to the swamps of Arkansas.
Right.
But children are adaptable. They adjust.
Right.
And, there was the routine and the regimentation and the regularity of 3 meals a day at the mess hall. We adjusted to that. The worst part was when the war was over and we came back to Los Angeles. We were impoverished. The government took everything from us. My father's business, our home, the bank account, everything. And when the war ended, they gave us a one-way ticket to anywhere in the United States that we wanted to go to, and $25. $25 to start life anew. Because this was immediately after the war, the hatred was still intense. And so my father left the camp first to scout out things back in Los Angeles to see how safe it was. And he found a place for us to stay. And we stayed in Tule. We had gone to Tule Lake by this time. The loyalty questionnaire happened. And we were in Tule Lake. And once he found a job, his first job was a dishwasher in a Chinatown restaurant. Only other Asians would hire us. And he had a hotel room. And so he wrote my mother and said, come on down. So the kids and my mother took the train down. And so I left when I was 5 years old, just barely 5 years old, a few weeks after my 5th birthday. And so coming, as my parents said, back to Los Angeles was for me a brand new experience.
Hmm.
We lived on Garnet Street, and so I didn't know downtown. And here the train arrived at the train station, and here were these tall buildings, and they pointed out that white uh, City Hall building, elegant shaft. It was just a dazzling place, and so my father was there to greet us, and we took the streetcar and got off, and the streetcar went down Broadway, and it was a dazzling experience. I'd never seen, this was afternoon, daylight, colored lights, lines that zigged and zagged, and lights that bubbled and popped, a movie palace marquees, yellow light, the yellow lines, blue lines, red lines, lights that bubbled. I was just blown away by that. And there were all these department stores, and here we were on the streetcar, which I had never ridden before, and see all this wondrous city, and department stores with these mannequins looking like unearthly white-faced women poised like that, wearing fashionable dresses. And then we got off at 7th Street, or maybe 8th Street, and we started walking with our luggage. We crossed Spring Street, which my father said was the Wall Street of the West, the financial district. And then we crossed Main Street, and that's where all the sailors and soldiers were. And the smell that came out of the what I thought was restaurants was rich with alcoholic aroma, and there were different kinds of theater there that had great big, huge, twice life-size cutouts of buxom women with names like Tempest Storm. And we went past that, and then it got dirty and seamy and smelly. The smell of human excrements. And it was Skid Row, and scary, ugly, smelly people leaning on the walls, sprawled on the sidewalk, staggering about. And we all kind of straightened up and clung on to our parents. And we went to the Skid Row Hotel, and the chaos there was unbelievable. The stench and the smell and the scary people, but the shrieking of the people, derelict women pulling each other's hair and fighting and falling down on the sidewalk, and the sound of the sirens, ambulances, police cars shrieking, and at night our hotel room would glow red with the light from the police cars. It was a horrible place. In fact, once we were walking down the sidewalk, and this derelict came at us, staggering at us with his eyes, glaring at us, and we froze. And I think my father was getting ready to fight him, and then suddenly he collapsed in front of us and barfed, and my baby sister shrieked, "Mama, let's go back home," meaning back behind barbed wire fence. So coming home was the worst part of the internment, as we remember it.
Right. What do you remember about your parents during that time after camp? Like they kept you all together and kept going, but what do you remember about them?
Well, my father, as I said, had this dishwasher job, but because he was block manager in both camps, in Rohr in Arkansas, as well as Tule Lake, he was no longer a block manager, but people came to him for advice and assistance and so whatever help he might be able to give them. So he opened up an employment office in Little Tokyo, where Japanese village is today. Where, if you know a Japanese village, the Omasa restaurant,
Okay.
that location at the entrance to Japanese village, there was a square brick building there, and Moline Alley right next to it. And he opened an employment office there and helped other returning Japanese Americans, and there were hordes of them. The hotel we were in was all Japanese American returnees, and down the block there was another hotel that was all Japanese American returnees. And so he helped them get jobs, but they were all the kind of jobs that he had. You know, he did the dishwashing in the morning, and then he went to the employment office, and my mother helped out, you know, filing and alphabetizing and answering phones. And but the jobs that he could find for these people were jobs like that: dishwasher, janitor, gardener. And my mother kept saying, you know, his fee would have been a tiny fraction of a pittance. And she said, we got to do something different. The children have to eat. And so after about 3 months of that, he found a dry cleaning store in shop in Boyle Heights in East LA. And he was he was a good businessman. He bought it cheap and built it up and sold it for a profit. But so from Skid Row, we went to the Mexican-American barrio, all Mexican-American. And all my classmates, all my friends in the neighborhood were Mexican-American. So we went from an all Japanese-American concentrated community to briefly Skid Row, a horrible place, into an all Mexican-American community. And I had friends with nicknames like Lata, Pelon, Chichi, and I'd walk home from school, and one of my friends might invite me to his mother's kitchen for a snack, after school snack, and I'd walk in there with him, and the kitchen had this wonderful, rich aroma of fresh steamed tortillas. And she would get the tortillas and put frijoles and smear it on it and roll it up. And I still have tortillas occasionally because it reminds me of that wonderful taste. And that's why I can speak Spanish. I had my basic Spanish lesson in Boyle Heights. And then I took Spanish in junior high school, and my minor in college was Latin American studies, and my major was theater arts. My father used to say, "You have a useless minor and a hopeless major. I'm going to be supporting you for the rest of your life." Well, I showed him.
You definitely did. Oh my gosh. George, do you remember ever talking with those friends about what had happened to you during the war? Did that ever come up with your classmates?
No, they didn't ask and I didn't tell. Don't ask, don't tell.
Oh, no. Wow. So when did you start sharing the story that, you know, now you are such a spokesperson for sharing this history, but when did that begin for you? And did you talk about this with your parents? Because we had a question from the audience earlier. That's not something that's, you know, my grandmother never talked about camp with my dad, except to say that she was in camp. But it sounds like you had more of these conversations with your parents. And then, you know, when did you start sharing these stories to a broader audience?
I feel really extraordinarily blessed in the father I had because I became, as a teenager, I became very curious about, I knew that we were in, you know, my parents kept calling it camp, and I knew we were in camp, but I wanted to know more about what was called camp. Because I remember the barbed wire fence and the sentry towers. And so I started reading history books. Couldn't find a thing. This is back in the 1950s. I couldn't find a thing about the internment in the history books. I thought maybe civics books might have something about it. Couldn't kind of thing, but I read about the what the United States is supposed to stand for, the ideals, due process. When you're arrested, you have a right to know what the charges are. And then you have the right to challenge those charges in a court of law. And if those charges prove to be true, then you're punished. But in our case, there were no charges.
Right.
There was no trial, no due process, which is a central pillar of our justice system.
Right.
How come? And I read, I read about Abraham Lincoln, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. How could something like what happened to us happen when those are the ideals that guide the United States of America?
Right.
And the only place that I could go to for discussion on it was my father. And so after dinner, we had many, many discussions about the internment. And I was pretty idealistic, and I challenged my father often, on that. I said, why? And one day I got very passionate, and I said, I blurted out, Daddy, you led us like sheep to slaughter into camp. And suddenly the conversational give and take stopped. My father was silent. And I immediately realized I'd hit a nerve. I had hurt him. And I felt terrible. This man who suffered the most, the anguish, the rage, and the sense of uncertainty for his children, and yet now, years later, his son was hurting him again. I felt terrible. He was silent for quite a few beats, and then he looked up at me and said, well, maybe you're right. And he got up and went into his bedroom and closed the door. I was devastated. This man that I loved so much, I felt like going up and knocking on his door and apologizing. But, I felt awkward.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'll apologize tomorrow morning. But when tomorrow morning came, it was even more awkward. And I never apologized. And now I can't.
Right.
So, but I am so eternally grateful because he's the one that shared so much, not only about the internment, and I learned about the anguish that he felt and all the, the relentless stages of this harassment and the cruelty of the harassment. A year into imprisonment, the government comes down with a loyalty questionnaire after they take everything from you and imprison you with no good cause, and then they're demanding loyalty. And that loyalty questionnaire had two critical questions, 27 and 28. Question 27 asked, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially it asked, will you bear arms to defend the United States of America? They were being asked to abandon us. By that time, I was 6 years old. My brother was 5. My baby sister was a toddler. They were being asked to abandon us and bear arms to defend the nation that's imprisoning us. It was preposterous. They answered no to that. Question 28, the other key question, was one sentence with two conflicting ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? Forswear our loyalty to the Emperor of Japan. We had no such loyalty to the Emperor. And for the government to presume that we had a pre-existing racial loyalty, a genetic loyalty to the Emperor was offensive. So if you answered no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the Emperor to forswear, that no applied to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States? it was a no-win question. If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, then that yes applied to the second part, meant you are confessing that you did have a loyalty to the emperor, and now we're prepared to forswear it and re-swear your loyalty to the United States.
Hmm.
Both my parents said, this is ridiculous. This is outrageous. This is insulting. This is stupid. Whatever idiot that put together a question like that, they answered no, and they were categorized as disloyal. The disloyalty is the stupidity of the government.
Right.
But the amazing thing is thousands of young Japanese Americans were so desperate to prove their loyalty that they bit the bullet, swallowed the bitter taste, and answered yes to those offensive questions.
Hmm.
And they were taken from behind barbed wire imprisonment, put into a segregated all Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regiment of Combat Team, and sent to the battlefields of Europe, where they fought with incredible courage and many with ferocious heroism. And they were incredible fighters. And they sustained, wave after wave of young Japanese Americans. They were literally used like cannon fodder.
Mm-hmm.
And they sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any other unit of comparable size. And when the war ended, they came back as heroes. But there was another group of young people.
Mm-hmm.
They were primarily from the camp that your grandmother was in, Heart Mountain, Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
They said, I'm an American and I will fight for my country, but I will fight as an American. If I can report to my hometown draft board with my family back home, I will have something to fight for. I would be like any American. I will fight as an American, but I will not go as an internee, leaving my family in imprisonment to put on the same uniform as that of the sentries guarding over my family. I will fight as an American.
Mm-hmm.
This was a gutsy stance to take on the full might of the United States government, but it was a principled stand.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an American stand, more American than those who bit the bullet and swallowed the bitter taste. And for that, they were tried for draft evasion. Can you imagine trying to draft people out of a prison camp, and when they stand on principle, to try them for draft evasion, and found guilty, and they were transferred from a barbed wire American concentration camp into Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary.
Hmm.
They thought they were soldiers. They fought on battlefields. Their battlefield was behind the tall concrete walls of a federal penitentiary, where they were subjected to insults and harassment and assaults. But many of them knew judo, and they let them know how strong they were, and they quickly got their respect.
Hmm.
And they were vilified after the war by the heroes, in quotes, that came back from the European theater.
Hmm.
So there is such a complex history behind the internment, and most Japanese Americans don't know that part of the story. My family, my parents, because they were no-nos, they were transferred to a segregation camp, Tule Lake. And this became the most important, symbolically, the cruelest of all camps. And it was also the largest of all camps. Most camps had a population from about 6,000 to about 11,000.
Mm-hmm.
Tule Lake was 18,000 people. These were the no-nos that were classified as disloyals. And this was the cruelest of all the camps. There was not only just one barbed wire fence. 2 more layers of barbed wire fence, and a half a dozen tanks patrolling the perimeter. Tanks that belonged on a battlefield, not goading and intimidating people who stood on principle, American principles,
Yeah.
and were unjustly categorized as disloyal. And the people in Tule Lake, those that had construction experience, were forced to build their own jail in a concentration camp, a concrete structure that became the jail. And we referred to that as the stockade.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the young people there were goaded by the government into radicalism. They became pro-Japan because, they're going to call us enemy aliens. Well, if that's what they're going to call us, by gum, we'll show you what kind of enemy you have to deal with. I mean, this is years, a couple of years of relentless goading by the government. And I remember waking up in the morning to the distant cadence of these young men jogging so that they'll be physically fit to rise up when Japan lands on the United States. They had the hachimaki, the headband, and some of them had the Japanese military rising sun painted on them. And the cadence I heard was "washoy, washoy, washoy, washoy." And when they ended their jog, they would end their run with "banzai, banzai, banzai." They were radicalized by the United States government and their stupidity. I mean, this is a very complex story.
Right.
And this part of the story is still not known even by Japanese Americans.
Right. And I think that's partly why I'm so grateful that we get to talk with you about your book. And I think that's been a big part of this virtual pilgrimage as well, is to dive into this complexity and hear from all of these different perspectives and do a little bit of the healing work, because it's not, this is also a division within our own community of talking about telling these stories too. And so I think it's so important to bring these up and to say these things that are, harmful and have caused these sort of waves of intergenerational trauma, or just the silences within our families. We need to tell
not only intergenerational,
right?
I mean, those families of the heroes that came back from Europe vilified those that were resistors or no-nos. And there were some horrible tragedies that happened as a result of that kind of community conflict, which still exists to this day. That those that vilified those people who stood on principle.
Right. And it's trying to have these conversations so we can hold all of these histories at the same time, that it's not one over the other. George, we could talk about this forever, but I do want to talk a little bit about your book and ask you, what was the process like of writing this or working on this book? And why did you choose the graphic memoir format for this particular version of storytelling?
Well, actually, I told the same story, which was published in 1994 in my autobiography called To the Stars. But on the cover, there's a picture of me in Starfleet uniform looking to the stars. I wrote on the coattails of Star Trek to tell our Japanese American story. And the first third is that part of my book that's in They Called Us Enemy. But even after the publication of To the Stars, I'd bump into people that I consider well-read, well-informed people. And so I'd share with them the story of my childhood imprisonment, and they would be shocked that something like that happened in the United States. Can you believe that? This was in the 1990s.
Right.
And it really troubled me, that the story is not really known by Americans. I mean, this is an American story. It's not a Japanese story. It's a Japanese-American story. And this should be a part of the American history. And these presumably well-read people didn't know this chapter of American history. I became very concerned, and as a kid, I loved comic books, and I said we have to reach the younger generation, maybe the adult generation are into their careers and building, their lives, and too busy to be reading a book, even if it had the attraction of a Starfleet uniform on the cover. And so I said, we want to reach the young people. Right. And I loved comic books. And here is another way to tell the same story, about reaching that preteen, teen, young adult readership. And so I partnered with these experts in graphic novels and this wonderful artist, Harmony Becker, who did the drawings. And so we did it as a graphic memoir. And on the cover is an irresistibly adorable 5-year-old. That's supposed to be me.
That's awesome. So what do you hope that readers will take away from They Called Us Enemy? What message or, motivation do you hope?
Well, for one thing, people who read graphic memoirs and graphic novels are going to become the voters of tomorrow, literally tomorrow. 3 months from now, right. We're going to have an election. But there'll be other elections too. And when, as a teenager, I was having these discussions, after dinner discussions with my father. He told me that this is a people's democracy. It is a participatory democracy. And we have to participate in this democracy. And he encouraged my brother and me to be active in student government. And we both became student body presidents. And one Sunday afternoon, when we were having a discussion about electoral politics, he showed me how it has to work. He drove me downtown to the Adlai Stevenson for President campaign headquarters and introduced me to electoral politics as a part of participatory democracy. And there I was working together with these people passionately dedicated to getting this great governor of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson, and I'd heard his speeches on the radio. He was a great man, and we wanted him to become president. He did, because he ran against the popular general Eisenhower. But nevertheless, I understood the importance of participating in electoral politics, and I became involved in other presidential campaigns and dressed my little niece up in her kimono, and we got a Little Tokyo headquarters for George McGovern. I was a McGovern delegate to the Democratic Convention, and we opened the George McGovern Little Tokyo headquarters with my niece in a kimono and handing a bouquet of roses to Mrs. McGovern when she came to help open the headquarters. But electoral politics is very important, participating in not just the electoral part of it, but even more serving on commissions, appointed positions, on boards, and actively engaged. And with the graphic memoir, we get to reach young people when their minds are still open and flexible and absorptive. And with an election coming up, I thought this would be, well, actually the book came out last July, just about a year ago. And now They Call Us Enemy is going to come out in a expanded hardcover. Great. Plus in 5 foreign languages, in Spanish, Nos llamaron enemigo, in French, in German, in Portuguese, and it's now being translated into Japanese.
Wow. Congratulations. That's really exciting. I'll be
We're very excited.
Yeah. Oh,
And there's interest in it for a television miniseries. So we're very excited by that.
that's awesome. And you've already shown you can do all the voices. You could do all the characters. We saw that already. Oh, that's great. Well, George,
You heard it.
Yeah, we heard it. We heard it. Exactly. We are fast approaching the end of our hour, which flew by, but we've gotten a couple of questions. I'm going to sort of put them together because several folks have asked, how is it that you wake up every morning committed to still fighting for good? How have you kept your faith in the United States and in the promise of democracy, despite, everything that you experienced and your family experienced, but that we continue seeing today? What kind of message of hope and inspiration keeps you going and maybe could keep more of us going too?
Well, at the beginning of my life, I spent it behind barbed wire fences with armed guards, American guards guarding American us, Japanese Americans. And here I am being able to publish books. I've got a lot of books out. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a 5th book. To publish books on my story. I enjoy a good career as an actor and as a writer and as an activist. And we're supposed to be in quarantine, but I'm being kept busy with requests for videos supporting this charity or that good cause or a good candidates. I just did another one for the Biden-Harris campaign this morning before talking. So I feel very blessed in this life. Yes, the same kind of thing is happening again. When I was a teenager, we had the civil rights movement going, and I was active in the civil rights movement. I did a civil rights musical called Fly Blackbird, and we were asked to perform at many civil rights rallies throughout LA County. And at the biggest one at the sports arena downtown, the keynote speaker was to be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as you know from the book, I got a chance to meet and shake hands with Dr. King and chat with him briefly. And so I've been a participant in social justice campaigns. During the Vietnam War, I was in the peace movement. By that time, I was pursuing an acting career, and I joined the Hollywood peace movement, the Entertainment Industry for Peace and Justice, EIPJ, and worked side by side with people like Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. And so the 60s was a very turbulent time. A president got assassinated. Dr. Martin Luther King got assassinated. President Kennedy's brother, Bobby Kennedy, got assassinated. And so it was a terrible time, but at the same time, democracy was challenged and it survived that turbulence. And here we are again in a different kind of turbulence and with an election facing us. We've got to be active participants in our democratic process. And so, yes, history goes in cycles. If you are a negativist, you can't participate. That's not going to happen. No, we're going to lose. That's too far. You've got to say, we will prevail. And you've got to have the North Star of our Constitution, which has shining ideals. And we have to keep on keeping on.
Wow. Thank you so much, George, for those words and for taking the time to share your book and your thoughts with us. This has been so special. We're so grateful. Hanako, you can't see her, but she's backstage dancing. She's very, very excited. Thank you so much, George. And thank you for contributing to the opening ceremony of Tadaima and the closing ceremony. That will be live at 6 p.m. Pacific tonight. So folks, stay tuned. And thank you, George. Take care of yourself. And thank you for being an inspiration to so many of us.
As we say in Starfleet, live long and prosper.